Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Let's Be About It. I'm Amanda Briggs.
And I'm Alan Blair.
We're here to lead personal and authentic conversations about all the tough and messy stuff in life.
Thank you for being here. We appreciate you joining us.
Hello everyone, and welcome to today's episode. We are going to be talking about mental health today. So we do want to put a few disclaimers out there right away at the beginning. We are going to be talking about depression, suicidal ideation, suicidality. And if these are tough topics for you, we want you to have a heads up right off the bat that we will be discussing them, but we will be discussing them in a very safe and trauma-informed manner. Alan and I talk about and train on these topics all the time. But what we want to do today in this episode is have more of the kind of conversation you'd have with friends over a cup of coffee. And so that's what we'd like to invite you into today as we take on some pretty tough subjects.
And we really want to just normalize these conversations. Many times when we talk about mental health or suicide, sometimes there's a stigma associated with it, but we just want to have a real, raw conversation. We'll be talking about some of the things that we've experienced, but again, it will be just a real conversation.
And it's interesting timing because before we started recording today's episode, we were kind of checking in with each other and catching up a bit. And we're both having a week and we're both having a day. And it's interesting timing to us that, we're going to sit down to talk about mental health on a day when we're both coming off a real rough week from a mental health standpoint.
And I can honestly say it's, some of the things that we're going to talk about today that I will talk about personally kind of stems from my difficult week. 3 days ago was the day in which my mom was born. Yesterday was the day in which she died. And so it was a really, 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 really rough week, on top of some other things. But my mom's passing, along with a few other things, will definitely kind of lead us into some of the conversations that we'll have today.
Thanks for sharing that. I knew it was her birthday. I did not know you were also dealing with the anniversary of her death in a 48-hour period.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Well, how we ended up in this episode and what we want to talk about today actually started last month in January 2023. We were both in San Antonio, Texas for a training event we were leading, and kind of in the debrief afterward the next day, we were talking about the last couple years and ended up having a very raw conversation about mental health struggles we had both been through. I think we were both peripherally aware of the other person's struggle, but I had no idea how bad it got at times for you. I think you had no idea how bad it got for me at times. And we looked at each other after having that conversation and went, you know what, we probably really need to talk about this in a podcast, and we need to have some of these conversations and bring people in because we do consider ourselves leaders of conversations about mental health and suicide prevention and awareness and all of that. And I think it's very helpful when folks who lead empowering conversations about those topics, which is so important, also raise their hand and say that I'm a human too, and I struggle with this too, and I have really hard, really bad days too. And that's the heart and that's our intent behind this episode today, is to let you in on some of those moments and normalize even strong people have really, really bad mental health days.
Absolutely, yeah. Because I can just, recall earlier on in life just thinking that, man, I don't see how, really a person could be depressed, or I don't see how a person could ever commit suicide, or I don't see how a person could ever do this or that. And it just reminds me of something that my dad used to always say. My dad, big guy, and sometimes he used to be laying on the couch, and my dad was bald headed. So I'd walk around by the couch and I just slap his head, kind of make fun of him because he was bald headed. And of course, I had good hair
I
back
was
then.
gonna
I had
say,
off waves.
you would take
And
your
my
hat
dad,
off.
Yeah, exactly. And my dad used to always say, "Keep living, keep living." And
Hmm.
in him saying keep living, he was basically saying that if you live long enough, you will experience some of these things, or you may even, end up losing your hair. So, but bottom line, you sometimes when we go through enough different things, if you put enough ingredients in your cake, you never know what the cake is going to end up tasting like. And
Yeah.
that's something specifically that we'll talk about today is that sometimes you don't think you would ever experience something until you are at that point going through it. And then it
Hmm.
gives you a brand new perspective. And I can tell you that from my personal experience.
Would you mind just kind of starting us off today with your story? And I know the last 2 years you have been through it. So could you share a bit about that?
Absolutely. And really, my story, I'm going to just begin it in August of 2021. And in August of 2021, uh, actually in May, I had transitioned to a new job. My previous job was taking a lot of time, so I transitioned to a new job. Excellent boss, who an excellent coworker, because my mom was diagnosed with cancer. In my previous job, I'm just like I don't have the time to do this job and try to be there for my mom who's experiencing cancer. So I transitioned in May. So May, June, July, take you to August. So in August, uh, there was this thing by the letters of COVID called COVID.
No.
And, a lot of people were getting it. I wasn't. So I thought that I was immune to it. No one in our family had gotten it either. But I was unfortunate to get COVID. And when I got COVID, I'm thinking, okay, I've got it. I'm going to just bounce back because my son had COVID
Mhm.
previously, probably about was diagnosed probably 4 days before I got it. So he had very little symptoms, had a little scratchy throat, but that was pretty much the extent of it. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna bounce back. I'm gonna be fine. Only problem is that I didn't bounce back quickly, and I wasn't fine. And COVID was definitely my kryptonite because I went from, you know, having this job, being productive. And for me, sometimes people associate, their job with their identity. I didn't
Mhm.
necessarily associate my job with my identity, but it was part of my purpose. And for me, what makes me happy is making a difference in other people's lives. And when I got COVID, when I got sick, that drastically changed. And the reason why it drastically changed was that after I got sick, I went through a period of time in which I was hospitalized,
Yeah, I remember
uh,
that.
and, and 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 my wife, and she's a nurse, and when I saw the way she was looking at me, and I could see that she was really scared, and I was like, oh man, I guess I really am sick.
Hmm.
Uh, so eventually, I was able to get out the hospital, and eventually, I started to get better. Got better to the point in which, like, okay, I'm ready to jump back on the job. Only to find out that, oh my gosh, I couldn't. So I had a whole slew of post-COVID symptoms, from the fatigue, severe headaches, to I mean, my body just ached all the time. No energy. I mean, when you look at that list of post-COVID symptoms, there was very few that I didn't have.
Mm.
But one of the ones that troubled me the most was my inability to look at computers for extended periods of time. And
Yeah.
the job that I did, I mean, I was always on the computer,
Yeah.
corresponding on the phone. So I couldn't do that job anymore. So when I would look at the computer, I mean, my vision would get blurry. And I always have a constant headache, but the headaches got that much worse. And I mean, I sometimes I would be literally from the symptoms, I would be out for days and just have to put myself in a dark room, no
Hmm.
stimuli. I couldn't have sound, light, nothing, because
Hmm.
it would make me really, really, really sick. So fast forwarding to the point in which, okay, these are the symptoms that I'm experiencing. I got to figure out how to live with this. So I'm going through trying to get better. My mom still has cancer. I didn't want to tell my mom that I had COVID because I didn't want to give her something else to worry about. So I'm,
Sounds
I'm
like
going
you.
on going on this path. And then I get this news that a friend of mine, initially the news was that, hey, this friend is missing. Have you seen him? I'm like, so I'm trying to call him, trying to figure out what was going on,
Mm.
only to find out a day later that this friend had committed suicide. And here I am, I'm this violence prevention program manager. And now one of the things that, we dealt with was, suicide. And
Mm.
then I've got this friend who committed suicide. So I'm not feeling well. I can no longer do my job. At this point, I can't be around my mom. I can't really help my mom. Then I've got this friend who committed suicide. And probably about 2 months later, and this is something I didn't share with you, Amanda. So we had this dog that we've had for, I
Oh
think,
no.
9 years. And this dog had cancer as well. And
Oh
then, our family dog ended up dying. I'm just like,
no.
what in the
Alan.
world is going on? And so continuing with the story is that I got to the point in which I could no longer work. So I end up losing my job because I couldn't do my job anymore.
Hmm.
And on top of this, I am feeling like I mean, to a certain extent, losing my mind because I was feeling like I wasn't myself.
Hmm.
I was always, I mean, upset, kind of on the edge, which was so unlike me. I've always been a calm, positive
Yeah.
person, but man, I was one that was on edge. And, whether my wife would say this or say that, and, I'm quick to respond out of anger. And then, I had gone to the doctor. And when I went to the doctor was asking me how I was doing. And the doctor had asked me a list of questions. In this list of questions at this initial appointment, it was probably about 10 questions. So my
Hmm.
answers was no, no, no. But these questions talked about whether or not I was depressed.
Oh, the
And at that
depression
time,
screening. Yeah.
yeah, and I,
Hmm.
I I wasn't depressed. But later on, I was just sitting there thinking about those exact same questions that the doctor asked me.
Hmm.
The only one at that time that was a no was, did I think about committing suicide? Because I had thought about committing suicide,
And this was a
but I
couple
was
months after the first screening.
exactly,
Okay. Okay.
and I wasn't suicidal, but I was definitely in deep depression.
Hmm.
And it was so hard for me because, me being a man and what it means to be a man, I was always taught, you need to be
Be
strong and
strong. Yeah.
you're not supposed to, really
You don't
show
need help.
emotions.
Yeah.
You don't seek out help. I
Yeah.
was, supposed to figure this out and, make this on my own. And
Hmm.
the reality of it, if I would have continued down that same path with that same mentality, I could have easily seen myself getting to the point of suicide.
Hmm.
I didn't get to that point because I'm like, and the thing about it is, I know because I would teach other people that it's okay to speak out. It's okay to get help. So I'm teaching everybody else, but I wasn't even heeding my own advice because some of the things that had been ingrained in me that I'm just like, man, I'm going to make it. I'm going to be okay. And I was going down a path that was definitely leading me to destruction. And one day my friend Amanda, who I'm on this podcast with, I reached out to. I know she was doing some coaching, and I reached out to her. Not only did I reach out to her, and she helped me through, but I was also seeing a therapist through
Hmm.
the VA. I've seen a therapist, and then on top of that, I was in a support group, and I was in a support group
Hmm.
with a bunch of different veterans all across the different forces, and
Hmm.
we were in this group. And when we were in this group, I'm thinking, I'm not going to really say anything. I'm just going to be there to listen. But when I started hearing other people talk about, I'm experiencing these symptoms, this symptom, that symptom, I'm like, whoa, hey, I'm not in this by myself.
Yeah.
And then when I started to open up, other people started to open up. And this was a group that was mixed with men and women. And this particular group, the women shared more freely what they were going through, what they were experiencing, how they were feeling, but the guys, not so much. But then it took one guy to kind of open up. And I remember me starting to open up. Then all of a sudden, we had this group that was really sharing what was going on from the emotional side, the
Mm-hmm.
fear side, the man, I didn't think that I would ever have somebody to talk to about this.
Mm-hmm.
So just that freedom of being able to speak to others, to seek that help
Yeah.
was a tremendous, I mean, just was just great for me.
I'm curious too, can you describe how it felt? So you were in this group, you weren't going to say anything, and then you started talking about it, and you see this positive impact on all of the men around you. And I know I'm a veteran as well. I can only imagine being a male veteran. Like veterans, you're supposed to be tough, you're supposed to be strong, all that kind of stuff. It's hard for people who have a military background at times to open up and talk about their mental health. You add all of the things society has said about being a male on top of that. What did you learn and what was that experience like for you as you took a chance, you were vulnerable, you opened up, and then all of this positive stuff happened?
Yeah, and just to kind of give you some quick dynamics. So we've had a male therapist that was leading the group.
Mm-hmm.
And of course he gave this disclaimer and he was like, hey, really need y'all to open up. You can, just that normal. So we heard him say that, but Minna was
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, right. We're not gonna open up.
Yeah.
But it took one of us, and I can say in one of those being me, it took me to open up and start speaking and saying it. But when I did that, it was like it gave everybody else the green light to like, okay,
Yeah.
so this guy is saying something and it's okay and nobody's judging him or saying negative things like you're weak or you're this, you're that by opening up.
Mm-hmm.
So it felt like a safe space. And then when the next person, when everyone had started opening up and sharing, it was really a safe space and people were just able to get really to unload and whatever was in their minds, in their hearts, things that they were experiencing,
Yeah.
they were able to get it out there. And when they got it out there, we were able to deal with it and talk amongst ourselves. I mean, the therapist was there to lead the group,
Mm-hmm.
but we were actually there to, as peers, to be there for one another, talk each other through because we were experiencing this. But the healing that happened in that session was absolutely amazing.
There's something so powerful about that group dynamic when it comes to normalizing experiences. I had the exact same experience when I first started talking about childhood sexual assault. I was in a group and we had the same thing. If one person got brave and shared something, it gave everyone else permission or that green light to share as well. And I think there's something so powerful about that normalization. It's
Absolutely.
life changing.
It is, and it's life changing in a sense of, you know, taking that risk. Number one,
Mm-hmm.
taking a risk to put yourself out there,
Yeah.
but then the reward that was huge. And once you experience something like that, in my opinion, then it really frees you from that point
Mm-hmm.
on.
Mm-hmm. And there's something so powerful as well and healing about naming what's going on. So not only are you giving permission for everyone else around you to be vulnerable and share, you're also healing yourself simultaneously by pulling the hard stuff out of the dark corner and shining a light on it, naming it and owning it, and then it starts to heal. It's a very interesting
Absolutely. And
dynamic.
for me, Amanda, and one of the key things was I had multiple outlets.
Mm-hmm.
I had
Mm-hmm.
my group therapy,
Mm-hmm.
that was an outlet. I had my one on one with my therapist,
Mm-hmm.
and that was an outlet. But I also had that one on one with Coach Amanda that was
We,
also great
yeah.
because Amanda knew me, but Amanda knew how to help me help myself. And when you put all of that together, especially with everything that I was experiencing,
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can, continue on. But with all of that together, it really helped me get on the right path. So that's why now, and when we were talking about doing this podcast, I'm just like, we definitely got to have this conversation because it's so
Yeah.
freeing for others.
And it takes a village. It takes a safe village. Let me very carefully clarify that. Like, it takes a
Yes,
safe village to get through a mental health crisis and not just survive it, but actually come out stronger on the other side of it. And I think that was one of the things that I really respected about how you handled that time. And I want to throw in there, it never even crossed my mind. I never thought you were weak for being in therapy and group therapy and seeking coaching. I I've always respected you, and nothing changed. I did not see you differently in any way. I think, if anything, I respected you more for how hard you were working to take care of yourself through that time. I know you and I worked a lot in coaching on career stuff, but it really does take a village to get through that. And that's okay. And that's normal. And that's human. And that's how it should be when everyone is caring for each other the way I think we're supposed to as humans.
And it takes that first step though. A person has to take that first step to
Terrifying step.
open, yes, and open stuff up to have that conversation. But one of the key things that you said, whoever you're opening yourself up to, they have to be a safe person that you
Mm-hmm.
disclose, talk. But the key is that the person has to seek. They have to seek out. Because if I'd never said anything, if
Yeah.
I'd never sought out any help, I guarantee you my path would not have been a good one.
Yeah. And as we think through this and talk about this, I think that there are some very interesting similarities in our stories. Even though you're a man, I'm a woman, I don't have the same stigma around seeking mental health care that, let's say, a man in our culture does. But it's still hard when you're considered a strong person to
But
to really
Amanda,
put that out there.
and I have to say this
Uh-huh.
because sometimes there's an expectation of strength and what it means to be a strong
Yes.
person.
Yes.
So as a man, I could say there was an expectation on me, but I can say for you, there was an observation. So I observed you being that strong person. So when I observed you being that person and that's who you are, then it
Hmm.
was hard for me, as we had that later conversation,
Yeah.
to see like possibly need some help. And as you share your story, I just want to piggyback on it and just kind of talk about that a little bit
Yeah,
more.
that's interesting. I was thinking through how much to share today, just given time constraints. And so let me share a little bit. My story starts kind of back in 2018 with a really difficult medical diagnosis when I was on active duty military. It had some surgeries that I was hopeful would mitigate it. It did not. It got so bad by 2021 that I was bedridden. I was in so much pain. I could barely think. I was fainting every day from lack of oxygen, just due to how the disease was impacting me. And I ended up in a situation where the military could not provide the appropriate medical care that I needed. So I went through this really tumultuous 18 months where I was dreadfully ill. I was dying. I'm very lucky to be alive, actually. And I lost my career, and then just all of the life stuff that kind of happened. And there was this amalgamation of, selling a house, moving, buying a house, unanticipated issues with the new house. We moved to a rural area, and the well went dry in the middle of me not being able to walk or think straight. And my husband's working full time and trying to figure out how we're going to do this. Like, how am I going to stay alive till surgery, and how are we going to handle everything that's just happening in life? And I got to a really, really bad place. Probably the worst mental health place I've been in my life, especially the last couple weeks before my surgery. So I had to get off active duty before I could travel across the country for the appropriate surgeon who was qualified to handle my case. And I mean, it got so bad that on the drive, the pain got so bad that on the drive across the country, I guess I tried to jump out of the car. And I don't remember a lot from that time, but I know it was bad. And as I think back over that time, I was in therapy. in the military. I had a fantastic therapist actually in the military, and then he got a short notice deployment. So one minute I had a therapist, the next day I didn't. And the person who replaced him, in my opinion, should not have a license to be near anyone with mental health issues. And I only went through a few more sessions before I realized actually this is harming me. I need to not see this person anymore. And by that time, I was so close to being off active duty that I decided to wait to seek mental health care until I could pick my own providers. And so, how I handled that was I had a real honest conversation with my husband, and I had a real honest conversation with my best friend. And they got me through that. And the thing is, during that time, I feel like I tried to reach out. Everyone I'm friends with on social media, I actually know in real life. And I went back after my surgery and I looked through the last 2 years of my posts, and there were so many times I put out there like a literal cry for help. I said something once about how my mental health was so poor that I had to go to leadership in the military and tell them, I'm in so much physical pain. There is so much going on. I am struggling. I'm not suicidal, but I am one step away. And I posted something about that. And then I think a while after that, I said, I'm really struggling. If anyone in the local area could stop by and just come talk with me about something other than my illness, I'd love to hear about your life. I mean, I really put some cries out there. And I think that people are so used to me being tough and strong. And I've been very open about my story for a decade and a half now. Childhood sexual assault, illness as an adult, infertility, miscarriage, divorce, you name it. I've kind of been through it. And so I've been very open about that. And I think people are really used to me being a survivor and being able to figure it out and recover and come back. And so I think when I put those cries out there as a strong person, people didn't know how to handle it, And I think most people, that's a tough situation. Let's just be honest. You get a text from a friend or a call, or you see a social media post, and you can tell someone's really struggling. And if you aren't trained and equipped to know how to handle that, that can be a very overwhelming and intimidating situation. So I don't blame people, but I do want to put out there that this happens. Like, this is something that strong people experience. I know other people who have been through crises who are considered strong people who did not get the support that they needed as well, just because people weren't used to it. They didn't know how to handle their strong person needing a strong person. And when you are that for so many people, like I am, I know everything that's going on in people's lives, usually, especially the people closest to me. So if I'm having a really bad mental health day and I know person number one has an important doctor's appointment, person number two's kid is sick, person number three is drowning in a project at work, it's also difficult as the person who needs help to be like, oh, I'm sorry, I know you're having a horrible day, but please help me. I'm not okay. That's a real thing, and that's hard too. And so Alan, when you mentioned that you kind of had a perception of me, yeah, I acknowledge that I am a strong person and I am a tough person. But tough people fall down too. And I really do get that. And if you're a tough person, if you're a strong person and you feel like you're falling down right now, just please know you're not alone. It happens. It happens to people who are professional resiliency and suicide prevention trainers. Hi, it's me. So like it happens. It's
Yes.
real. It's normal, unfortunately.
In a minute, and it's still so difficult for me to hear that. I'm not a big social media, type
Oh,
person,
yeah.
but at the same time, I know that you were going through some of that, but just what I have observed of you, the strong person that you've been for so many people, because I can recall sending survivors to talk to you because I know that you would help them through. I even recall sending parents of survivors your way to talk to you to
And I love that. I love it. I will always do that.
right. And even myself, I sent myself to you because I knew that you could help me, and it's just so difficult when you see someone who's so strong, who's overcome so much. Then sometimes the thought process is, man, I know you're going through a sickness. I didn't realize how bad it was, but I did know that you were sick. So in my mind, I was just thinking, okay, you're going to be fine. This is just another one of those hurdles that you're going to overcome because you've overcome so many, not ever realizing how difficult of a time that you were having emotionally, mentally, and even to the extent that you were having physically. I mean, I had no idea that you were that close to death or that you were in as much pain as you were in. And so many times, kind of like what you were saying, even those people that are strong, they need people checking in on them as
Hmm.
well. This friend that I had, I knew him as a strong person, both physically, because he and I used to work out in the gym every morning, and he used to
Hmm.
push me. But he's strong physically, but I thought, in mentally, I thought he was fine. He had so much to live for. So, for me, I never thought that he would reach the point in which he would even consider taking his life, and he did. So with you, I could just, I never knew that you were at that point. And the
Hmm.
thing about it is that I didn't check in, and I should have. So for me, that's something that I know I've apologized to you, about it previously, but it's just hard. But when we had that conversation, it really opened up my eyes. Like, whoa! I mean, I really do need to check in on the people that I perceive that are strong because they are doing so much for everybody else. But who's there to check on them to make sure that they are okay?
And I appreciate that, and I know you and I have had this conversation, and one of the things that I still think is important to emphasize is even if you are a strong person, even if people aren't checking on you, it's still incumbent upon each of us as individuals to advocate for ourselves and to get help. And so I I'm proud of myself looking back that I tried, that I cast the net wide because it was a prolonged illness. It was a long time for my husband and my best friend to be the only people who knew what was going on and knew how severe it was. And I'm endlessly grateful to both of them, to both Kyle and Amber, for stepping up and stepping in when I needed them. But I will say, it's still, as an adult, it's still my responsibility to pick up the phone and call people to put myself in therapy, which I did the moment I got back from surgery. I was like, okay, we're signing up for therapy now. And the minute I could drive, I had my butt in therapy. So, I think that there's still a responsibility to get help and be creative and find ways to get people in your corner if your normal avenues aren't working. But just know, like, as a strong person, if you identify as that, if you're going through a really tough time and you're noticing people aren't picking up on your subtle cues, they're not picking up on your not so subtle cues, you do have an obstacle in front of you, which is everyone's perception of you. And you might have to jump up and down higher and scream a little louder and wave more red flags. And I don't think I totally exhausted those options. I think I could have spoken up more. I could have waved more red flags. And I'm very grateful I got through that time. And I'm doing so much better now. But just know that if you are a strong person, you might have to put in a little more effort to get people to see your struggle because they do have a certain perception of you as a survivor type, as a strong person type.
And I can say for myself, and especially coming from a male perspective, or having something ingrained in you that
Yeah.
you have to be strong and you don't show emotion, is that you have to overcome that, and to a certain extent, not worry about what people are thinking about you or what they're going to say with you.
Yeah.
Overcome that fear. And then when you actually say something and get the help that you need, then you truly realize that all these things that you had in your mind about how they're going to look at you, sometimes that's just a stereotype, or sometimes that's
Mm-hmm.
just really in your head.
Mm-hmm.
But it is so important to reach out and get that help that you need because
Yeah.
really, and we really, Amanda and I really want to normalize getting help because that's
Yeah.
what we have to do.
Yeah. And sometimes you can be going through life and not know how bad it is until there's a crisis moment. And Alan, I'm going to make you share your car story because it's hilarious. But for me, it was, I'm a pretty positive person most of the time. Kyle would say I'm an optimistic pessimist, I think is what he calls me. And but I'm normally a pretty positive person and I normally roll with the punches really well. And when I was that sick and in that much pain, it went out the window. And suddenly I'm snapping at my husband, whom I love very much, and who's a wonderful person. But I was just angry all the time. I didn't feel like myself. I felt like a stranger had taken up residence in my body and in my brain, and I didn't know who that person was. I really didn't like her. She wasn't very nice to be around. And I think that was one of the moments for me when I realized, okay, so you had a great therapist, that person is deployed and gone. You had a negative experience. You can't go back there. You got to do something. And that's when I picked up the phone and I called my best friend. And that's when I sat my husband down and leveled with him about why I was acting the way I was acting and where I was with my mental health. And I know, Alan, you have a much better story to illustrate this.
I wouldn't say a much better story. It's
It's hysterical.
kind of an embarrassing story, and one that my family don't know about, particularly my wife. And I do want to apologize to my wife, by the way, because I know sometimes I would act a little crazy, and apologize for this story. So first time you're gonna hear it if you watch this podcast. But as one day again, I had trouble looking at computers, so on and so forth. So I was part of this training. So I was listening to this training online, and it was on diversity and inclusion. And we had this conversation going, and there was a particular guy who had a particular different viewpoint, and I was just sharing some of my personal experiences, and we were talking about police brutality, so on and so forth. So anyway, after this training, had driven to a grocery store we have
Can
here in
I
San
just say
Antonio.
that the individual was being racist and absolutely inappropriate? That's what was going on. Okay.
Yeah,
With
so
that, like, let's just give you some credit there. You were handling racist
so
comments.
so the conversation it definitely rubbed me the wrong way, but I was able to keep it together. So I was driving to this grocery store in San Antonio called HEB. So I'm driving through the parking lot, and I'm driving in front of the store. So I stopped because people were crossing. So as they were crossing, I was getting ready to go, and then a car was coming up the aisle. So they tried to kind of cut in, and in my mind, I've been waiting here all this time. You're not just gonna cut in front of me. You're gonna have to wait. So I
Hmm.
kind of proceeded not to let this person in. So this person proceeds to reach out his car, show me a finger, and tells me "F you." So normally I probably would have let this pass, but this day, with this experience I just experienced, and now he's telling me this. So I drive around the parking lot, and I see the direction that he's going, and he goes in front of an aisle, like it's a little strip, different little stores that are over there. So I pull up in front of him, and I'm in a big SUV. So I put my car in park, and I jump out the car because he couldn't go anywhere. He couldn't back up those cars behind him, and he couldn't go around me because I parked right there in the middle, so he couldn't go around. So I'm walking up to his car, mad, and I am upset. And as I'm walking, then I started talking to myself like, what in the world are you doing? You're the violence prevention program manager, and here you are in this parking lot walking towards this man. And as I'm walking towards him, he was a big guy, tattooed, bald head, big beard. And as I'm walking to him, and he's looking at me, and so his window is still down, and I just say, hey, you know, you might not want to tell people these type of things. I was like, man, if this was a different time, a different day, this would definitely go differently. And this guy actually apologized. And I'm thinking to myself, this could have been such a horrible
Yeah.
situation. Me walking towards, he could have had a gun and
Yeah.
whatever the case may have been. All of that to say I was not in my right mind. I was all in my emotions. I just had it up to here that day. And I did something that was really uncharacteristic of me. And so, family, everybody, I'm sorry I put myself in that position, but it ended up going well. So that's my car story, Amanda.
And I'm laughing so much over here because I know Alan and he is the perfect gentleman. What he said, his baseline, he's very steady personality. And So knowing what I know now about what you were going through during that time, there is no judgment at all. There wouldn't have been anyways. I think it's a funny
Mhm.
story, but I think it's just interesting how you and I both like were pretty positive, stable people in our personalities, and then you get, like you said at the beginning, you get enough of the right ingredients. You get enough traumas or enough frustrations or enough stuff that's outside your control, and they all hit at the same time, and you can be a really balanced, healthy person as your baseline, but enough of that stuff comes in and you start to struggle. You have mental health
Yes.
issues. You might get to the point of suicidal ideation. You might jump out of your car and charge down someone who flipped you off. They might deserve it. But, like that happens. And I consider myself a mature, stable, healthy person. I consider Alan a mature, stable,
Right.
healthy person. And we both went through something that kind of changed how we interacted with the world for a while. So if that's you, I want you to know you're not alone. You're not crazy. Life's happening right now. And there's a way through and a way out and a way back to who you know you are at your best. But it does involve being vulnerable and raising your hand and saying, I am not okay and I need help. And if you are someone who maybe has a few societal or personality blocks to people really receiving that message of, hey, I need help, just know it does not, that is not a reflection on the truth of what you're going through. It is not a reflection on the truth of what you're going through. What you're going through is real. What you're going through is hard. What you're going through is valid. You need support. I don't care if you're the strongest, toughest person in the world. It's okay to need help and need support. Alan, I saw the saddest thing on Instagram yesterday, and it was basically a therapist, a male therapist who specializes in men's issues. Kind of, I think the kids these days call it stitching. Like he was reacting to a video someone else
Mhm.
posted, and it was just a compilation of men saying that they'd love to speak up, but no one cares. No one cares. No one cares. And I thought of you and I thought of your story and the struggle you went through to raise your hand and say, no, someone's going to care. Someone's going to care. And I thought of myself, and not that I'm a man, but just the struggle I went through as a strong person whom people normally rely on to raise my hand and say, no, I need help this time. I need support. That's real, that's valid, and it's allowed, and it's normal.
Absolutely. And that doesn't just stop. Like I needed help this week. And so me reaching out for help when I need it has become a normal thing. So it's not just I needed help at this one point in time and it's over with and I never need help again. But this has become a part of my life, a normal part of my life, a regular part of my life,
Mm-hmm.
and will continue for the rest of my life
Mm-hmm.
so I can be whole, get the help that I need, and be the person or the man that I need to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I learned a lot too about just being a lot more direct, being a lot more direct with folks. If I hope I don't ever get to that place again. I was suicidal a lot as a child because of the abuse and chaotic environment in which I grew up. So this was the first time I had felt like that in decades. And what I learned is when I need help, I need to be very specific and blunt, and I need to go directly to safe individuals. And I need to sit them down and say, okay, hear me out. This is where I'm at, and this is how bad it is, and I need help. And then if I know specifically how I need help, I need to tell them. It's like when you're managing a crisis, like there's a car accident, you don't say someone call the police, call an ambulance. You point at someone and you say you call 911. It's kind of like that. You have to be willing to be very specific and precise as you go seek out help. And what I found is that when I do that, people are very receptive to it and they don't judge me. They try to come alongside me to the very best of their ability and offer love and care and support.
Absolutely. And Mena, as we have these podcasts, as we share this information, I'm so thankful that we are able to be authentic and we're just able to keep it real,
Yeah.
because people can think what they want to think about me, but I just want to make sure that, it kind of reminds me of a phrase that my pops used to say, and he say, don't just talk about it, be about it. So I
Hmm.
don't want us to just talk about it. So as you are hearing some of these podcasts, so don't just let us talk about it, but I want us to be about it. Be
Yeah.
about the business of making a difference. Be about the business of implementing some of the things that we're having these conversations about. Okay, so let's be about it, and not let's just, don't just talk about it.
I agree. Thanks so much for joining us today. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much for spending your time with us today. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, leave a review. You know the drill.
Until next time, let's not just talk about it, let's be about it.